fourth time guest. Ari is back with us. I'm so excited that he said yes again. And as people that is part of the Maverick community, as we're starting to become, and people you write to me, you know how much we love to dive into the work at Zingerman. So we share a lot of the stuff Ari writes, and also the last thing that came out for us was actually his speech he did at the Welcome conference last year in New York on dignity, and we will touch a bit on that today. But likely today we're back together because last time we talked about beliefs in business and the power of them both in business and life, and how they can really change your life for you. And this time we're going to dive into the fourth book, being a better leader. So the last 12 months since I, talked with Ari last time, I've been in and out of that book and been thinking about what should we try to touch on here to give the most value to you guys that's listening in, because you need to go and read the book to actually get it all. I don't think we will be able to cover all, but we're really going to touch on, the key things. And actually, it's quite interesting. Ari and I were just talking about before we started, why is it actually you're right? It actually gets to get clarity for yourself. And that's one of the things I've been taking from studying Ari and the work at Zingerman's and other like-minded people. So welcome back again, Ari. It's a super big pleasure to have you.
Glad to see you. And it's snowing here in Ann Arbor this morning for the first time this year. So I kind of wish I was there, but whatever.
Well, there's something beautiful about snow as a Scandinavian. I love that time of year.
There is, but
and we can also see your.
I wasn't ready. Ready.
Who is ready? You prepare yourself to be ready all the time.
Well, sometimes it seemed like it was just going to be a small, tiny bit for a little while this morning, but it's actually kind of meaningful. So it's
the real
better
thing.
Or for worse, it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, then I'm sure you have tried it before then, and you have prepared as a society. Like in what we're going to be talking about today, you need to prepare to become a great leader. It's a journey. Yeah. And I wanted to actually start out in a different place with you, because the last year, I would say, I've had a number of interviews with really Maverick leaders that want to do the right thing. And they all talk about that, have we actually lost that craft for hospitality in the food and, hospitality industry? And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And I'm thinking it's more like a general thing, because we had the pandemic and then we came out of that and nobody really talking about that anymore. But it seems like lots of leaders are concerned about the craft of hospitality is disappearing.
Well, I don't know. I just work on ours. I don't really know. I don't think it was ever all good. Nothing is. And I'm sure there's been challenging situations in any number of places. And, everybody, starting with us, falls short every day. I mean, none of us get it all right. Just like, whatever metaphor, no musician hits every note perfectly and no athlete gets every play perfectly right. But I don't know. We've been working on it since we opened, and we're working on it just as hard now,
But do you, in your work, because one of the things I see, you're talking a lot about dignity and the revolution of dignity. Do you see actually that's a form of hospitality as well? Because I guess that's a universal.
I think it underlies it. Yeah, I guess I would say off the top of my head, it's a prerequisite. I think there's more to it than just dignity. I mean, we have our 3 steps to great service and our 5 steps to handling customer complaints, among other many different what we call organizational recipes around service, but those would be the core. But dignity absolutely runs in parallel or supports the great service work.
And how has that work gone? Because you sat down, you're as you say, very good in the Welcome conference, that like we all get, shaken by different things, and something that's from one day or one moment to another, our world has changed. And you was really the invasion of Ukraine, and we talked a bit about that last year.
Yeah.
How have you seen that, your revolution been moving on? Because you were invited to the Welcome conference, which in my view, would be one of the best places from a hospitality point of view to talk to really influential people on dignity.
Well, I think it's like anything else. People like the idea of things, just like they like the idea of eating better or being nicer to their significant other or whatever. But then it's actually work, And I think that people have been generally trained to believe that revolutions happen by changing leaders, but I think in the long run, they happen more by the way we behave. And on the ground every day. And it's people like you and me and, whoever we're friends with or working with or that we interact with, that's really where the change is going to come. So it's slow, it's not there. People like the sort of headline, okay, the revolution to dignity happened and we're all set now, but it doesn't work that way. And so it's just little here and a little there, and a few people listened to the podcast we did last year and maybe they changed, and a few people came to that conference and maybe they changed, and slowly but surely we make headway.
How have you seen that work have influenced on Zingerman's? Because I guess you were already quite well equipped on that journey, but I guess it did something.
Well, I think it wasn't in conflict with what we were already trying to do. It's really parallel or supportive. It just gives a little bit more context, construct. And one of the beliefs, we've talked about beliefs. I mean, one of the beliefs that's changed for me over the decades, I think many years ago, I would have come from okay, this is a great idea. We got to get everybody to do this. And just pushed really hard to get it accepted organization-wide. But I learned the hard way over the years, it actually goes better just to start small and let it essentially grow organically. And that's kind of what's happening. I mean, it happened with the belief stuff also. It let it just sort of play out. And now, 10 years later, slowly but surely now it's incorporated into a lot of the classes. Zingerman teaches it in almost every seminar. We have a statement of beliefs that we give to everybody that is part of their job expectations. So it's become over time an integral piece of our organizational philosophy and our behavior and our decision making. And I think dignity is the same, but it's only a couple years in. So slowly but surely it becomes incorporated into the conversation and into what we do.
And that really goes on to, because as you're reading the book about, or the pamphlets for becoming a better leader and all the other great stuff you have on the website, you start really to get an idea about it actually goes down to how each individual is acting every day in the organization. So what is actually the vision/belief for better leadership in Zingerman's, if you really should boil it down?
Yeah, well, you know from reading the book, I mean, we have a lot of pieces to it. I think one of the unhelpful parts of the Industrial Revolution is people learned this belief that there's like this one thing they're supposed to do. Yeah. And so they look for lean, or they look for agile, or they look for, whatever it is, and that one thing's going to fix it. But I think it's the intellectual equivalent of or philosophical equivalent of monoculture in agriculture. Like they grow the one thing and it looks good from afar and it sounds good at a bank proposal, but it's actually not very healthy. And so I think here we both unintentionally and now intentionally have taken much more of what would be called a multi-cropping, a more regenerative approach where you have a lot of things that are going on, and people's resistance from the outside is it's too complicated. But I think it actually is much more holistic and much more sustainable. So the core, though, to answer your question, the core of the leadership stuff is indeed servant leadership. And I know from having taught it in the UK, sometimes people react negatively to the word servant. I don't really care. I can't remember what our friends and colleagues at Niels Yard Dairy adapted it and chose a different term than servant. In the U.S., servants there's not a long, we have a lot of problems, but we don't have a long history of servants. No. It exists, but it's not doesn't play a prominent role in people's everyday language or culture like I think it does in the UK. But anyway, servant leadership came from the work of Robert Greenleaf, who worked for a giant company, AT&T, and wrote a book in 1977. It seems an odd place for him to have worked, to have come up with such a creative and counter to the mainstream approach or philosophy. But he used to say that he was the kept radical of AT&T, and that when they needed a out of the box idea or to challenge social norms or whatever, they would come find him and he would give an idea. But that's where it comes from. And we've adapted it as we always do. We try not to just lift things as they are, because it's important. And I think it's true for everybody listening, not to just do what we do here, but to adapt it to your own setting, to your ecosystem, to your values, to your organization. But anyway, the basic premise of it is that the leader's number one responsibility is to serve the organization, not the other way around, which sounds like no one ever argues when one says that, or when I've said it, but I think it's actually 180 degrees opposite of how many people have been trained to think of business. They've been trained to think of business as you start the business to get rich for yourself, and everybody else, even if you're being nice to them en route, is essentially just a tool, or a vehicle to get you to that success. And here it's the other way, which is we exist as leaders in order to serve the organization, which includes the people in it, the community, et cetera, et cetera. And doesn't mean we don't want anything out of it. Of course we do. I have, a house payment, and we got a lot of dogs to support at our house, and, all that good stuff. But the point is that it doesn't exist just for the boss's benefit. And in American history, and I'm guessing some folks there will know, and now with YouTube, you can just look it up. But it's actually last week, was the anniversary of John F. Kennedy getting killed, which is still a tragic turning point in American history. But anyway, he has the famous line from one of his speeches that said, "Ask not what you can do for the country. Ask not what the country can do for you. Ask what you can do for the country." And I think that's really what this comes down to.
Yeah, now you jumped into the servant leadership thing. I was thinking about, also reading to the, as you said, very, very good as well. But I think often people forget when they want to take ideas either from management book or other companies, actually adapting it to your world, to the way you are operating, and actually take the best bit out and actually make your own twist on it. And I think often that goes wrong. You want to go, I want to be like Zingerman, so I'm going to go and do all the things Ari wrote about, but actually it's not going to work in my context, because I still need to do the work of thinking it into my context. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Stash Kazmierski, who I'm sure I've referenced him in our conversations, who taught us the visioning many years ago. He always taught us to adapt, not adapt. And I just wrote for the e-news that came out today, Friday, on Wednesday, which somewhere in your inbox, about this concept called deep understanding, which I had never thought about. And I learned from a woman, Carol Sanford. She actually just passed away that same day, tragically, but she was in her 80s, so she lived a good life. But it's really the idea. I mean, it's essentially like what we did with dignity. Like we didn't make up the idea of dignity, and I didn't even make up the idea of a revolution of dignity. It came from the Ukrainian people's courage in 2014. But it's to take the idea of dignity, make it our own, not in opposition to other people, but in deference and with respect for other people, and then sort of create it in a way that takes us to another level. So not just to paper over things or paint a new color on the building, but to actually embrace from the inside out. And that's really what I think is most powerful. So that's what we did with servant leadership too. I mean, we don't claim to have made it up. It came from Greenleaf, but as always, we've tried to take his teachings and fit it in, as you just described so nicely, into our ecosystem.
And you talk also about, in the book, you talk about there's some paradoxes you have to be aware of. As you say, lots of people want to do that, but really when they start to practicing this, they're going to run into these really big paradoxes. Yeah,
and the paradox is everywhere. I mean, there's no way around it. You could go into denial and pretend that it's black and white, but it isn't, And so uh, what we just described already. Like, I have expenses and needs and insecurities, and at this, I want my time for myself or whatever, and at the same time, I want to serve the organization. And if you take a zero-sum game mentality in the moment, they're in conflict. The less I sleep, the more I can work, but I got to sleep too. So it's trying to find balancing points. And then within the context of it, as you get into more details, one of the elements, there's 6 elements, which I'm sure we'll get into. And the second one is to give great service to the staff, but it needs to be done in the greater context of serving the organization. So if you work, I'm sitting at Zingerman. So if you work here at Zingerman and you say, I need to double my pay next week, and I go, great, we're going to do whatever you want, but it screws up the imbalance, the balance of equity within Zingerman, and it makes it financially unsustainable in the long run. So you get a big raise, but then Zingerman goes out of business. That's not helping. So it's trying to do all of those things at the same time. And paradox is just the reality of our lives. It's not always easy to embrace, but it's true whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and you also, you mentioned the 6 elements yourself, and I think it's really interesting. Like lots of the works and the systems you have, you always start with the vision.
Yeah,
the vision work, and actually there has to be a vision for your servant leadership as well, or the leadership approach you have as well, or the things you're doing as a leader.
Yeah, and so one of the big things I learned from Maggie Bayless at Zingerman, the partner there many years ago, is just the importance of getting clarity of expectations. Bell Hooks, the American writer who passed away 2 years ago in December, she talked about the importance of clear definitions. And so Greenleaf's book is great. I don't remember, it's about 400 pages. About a third of it is on not-for-profits, a third of it's on educational institutions, and a third of it's on business. So it really applies to everybody, and I recommend the book. I've read it multiple times, but at the same time, we need here, in the spirit of what Maggie taught me and Bell Hooks reinforces, we need to be able to teach it to a new manager in our organization who's got 6,000 other things going on, and not give them just the 400-page book and say, here, figure it out. So we always come up, as I mentioned earlier, 3 steps to great service, 5 steps to handling customer complaint, 4 elements of a vision. We call them organizational recipes.
Yeah.
They're not standard operating procedures because they don't tell you exactly what to do in the situation, because each situation is likely a little different. But it does, just like a cook in the kitchen, it gets you close, but you still have to taste the salt. You still have to, the reality, like today it's snowing here. So if you go in the kitchen and the pan is colder, it's, we're not starting in a lab. So it's not like they preheat you can preheat the oven, but if you don't preheat the pan, or the room temperature is colder, it's all going to change the dish, not to mention the terroir of where the carrot came from or whatever. So the same is true with this stuff. We have tried to apply it in each situation, but there's 6 elements. The first one, as you said, is to make sure that there's vision. People need to know where they're going. That can be, in our world, it could be the vision for the organization. We do vision, as you know, but people might not have remembered, we do vision for everything. So there's a vision for Zingerman's community of businesses that we wrote, finished actually the year before, or right when the pandemic was starting is when we finished 2 years of work on the vision. But then each business has a vision also. So the Zingerman, the Roadhouse, etc. Then each project we write visions for, and in the context of hospitality, I mean, some of the businesses write a vision for each shift. So it's being clear on where you're going, because if you don't know where you're going, it's hard to get to where you want it to be. So vision is a huge piece of our approach.
And then you said, yeah, you have the 3 steps to great service, and then the handling customer complaints, and that's again, like you say, it's a recipe to how to manage this, and actually how you actually use that as it's not just about customers, it's also about how you actually handle staff and stakeholders you're working with as a leader.
Yep. So the first element for us there's 6 elements of servant leadership, and the first is vision, as you said. The second is that we give great service to the staff. And so we have also teachings on how to give great service to guests. And that's in the Zingerman's Guide to Giving Great Service little book that I wrote many years ago. And it's still the core of what we do. And this is really just us applying the same things between us as leaders, looking at the staff as our customers. So when I come to work every day, I look at the staff like my customers. I mean, it's no different. And, so the first step, figuring out what people want, like we need to know where they're trying to go with their life. Some of them want to move up and be partners or managers. Some of them are just here for 6 months and they want to go away to college and or university, you would say there. And so it's all the same. I mean, for me, I just need to know where they want to go so I can adapt what I do for them in order to work. And just as a super simple example, one element for us of that first step of figuring out what the guest likes is we call the 10-4 rule. Somebody taught it to me decades ago. I don't remember who it was, to be honest, but at 10 feet, and you can translate into meters if you need to, but 10 feet, we make eye contact, and at 4 and greet and smile. And at 4 feet, we greet people. So 10 feet, eye contact and smile, 4 feet, greet. So it's the same for me when I come in and I see staff. And, to be clear, I know most people don't believe it that see me, but I'm a total awkward, shy introvert. It's just that if I want to do this work effectively, then I need to get over it in the moment and take a deep breath and go over and greet the new employee, even though I'd prefer to ignore them and hope they don't see me. So the energy, the service that goes out to the guest all emanates out from the leader, whether we want to admit it or not. It's the reality. And so I need to treat them as customers and give them great service so that when you and your family or your friends come in to eat or to shop, that they're able to feel supported, encouraged, safe, and they're giving you great service.
Yeah, and I guess it's because if you're likely to be treated this way yourself, this is what you're going to do with other people.
Well, and even if you don't, it doesn't matter. It's still our job. So, I think it's often said, treat others as you want to be treated, but I'm an introvert. I want to be left alone. That doesn't translate into good hospitality, so it's like, I like to, as you know, I like to read. So I don't need to get together, but other people do want to meet. And so, that's part of the paradox too. Like, I don't really need to meet. I know what you look like. I'm happy to do it on email. But, for other people, take that as an insult that you don't want to get together with them. And so it's trying to balance my own needs with theirs and remember that they're my customer and try to do as best I can, imperfect though it will always be, to give them great service.
And then you have the third step, which is acting in an ethical manner. And I think that's a really interesting one because there's so many layers to that as I read it through. It's not just like
and that's
doing
a lot
the right thing.
A lot where the paradox is going to come in. So it's easy to say manage in an ethical manner. Like, again, nobody goes, I'm not going to manage in an ethical manner. But the reality, there's sort of the extreme terrible and extreme good. But the reality is 99% of what we deal with is in the middle. I was presenting on this once in Detroit, and a woman raised her hand. She said, I know what you mean. My father always taught me it's not that easy, not that difficult to decide between right and wrong. That's actually pretty easy.
Yeah.
What's hard is to decide between right and right. And so it's often said in history conversations that every decision one makes is a political decision. I don't know if that's true or not, but what I will say is every decision is an ethical decision. So, it's knowing if I walk over the crushed cup on the sidewalk because it's cold, on the one hand, it's cold, I want to get inside. On the other hand, if I don't pick it up, who's going to pick it up? if I don't respond promptly, who's going to respond? If I don't apologize if I did something wrong, even though I'm not sure it was really my fault, then it sets a bad precedent. So those are all ethical decisions, whether we like it or not. And I think one of the big keys of this work is, as you know, it's another essay in that book, but we teach everybody here to think like a leader from the time they start. And it's an expectation that everybody who works here will take responsibility for leadership regardless of their position. So management is a set of job responsibilities, but leadership is really a mindset. It's a philosophy. It's a way to be in the world. And so that means that they need to learn to make ethical decisions. And it's not binary. It's not black and white. It's not a standard operating procedure. What you do for a guest who's unhappy, like one customer will be angry if you give them something, and the other one will be angry if you don't. And you need to know, in the spirit of your question about hospitality, like it takes nuance, just like farming is not an exact science, or cooking's not an exact science either. I mean, science is part of it, but it still requires the craft of doing what you do. So it's really having those conversations, and it's easy to convey in this conversation because we're in a culinary context. But I always say it's like tasting for salt. Like you have to taste next to the person. Because my what's the right salt level for me might not be right for another food business. And that's not to say ours is, objectively better than the person down the road. But if you're going to come work here and you're new, I have an obligation to teach you what we do. And this is true for ethics too. So helping to have those conversations. And even if a staff member isn't the person making the decision, it's still imperative that they get involved into the conversation so they can learn over time how to think about this stuff philosophically.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that, again, like it is, as you say, it's funny enough. It is like in the world we especially live in right now, you can talk about what is, the right thing and how do you actually do the right thing. We think we all can agree on what the right thing is, but how do you actually follow through and do the right thing when, many odds sometimes are against you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, we won't get it right every time, but we can work on it. And when we have the conversations, then we're making the decisions together. And so, just like in sports, whatever, like if they call a play and it's not the best play, then it is what it is. But we all decided that was the play we were going to run. So I think rather than the boss acting like we have all the answers, we don't. We may be, in the end, the one where we're responsible, but it's still helpful to teach new staff, like, well, what should we do? What do you think we should do? Here's the situation. What do you think is best? And it doesn't mean we just go with what they say because they might be wrong. But it's also important for them to form the thinking processes, to get practice in it, to understand what it means to think about ethics, and then also to model that asking for help is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So that they're not out on their own trying to guess what to do, getting it completely wrong because they weren't grounded enough. Like none of us see objectively. We're all biased. We all have beliefs, as per our earlier conversation.
Does this principle of leadership, especially under servant leadership, is that also what informs how you impact, the not only the people that work in the business, but the communities, the part of the planet you're involved in? Because I guess that really is the act on everyday level that then scales up.
Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, it's just a service mindset. So again, it's a different conversation probably, but one of the key beliefs that I learned from studying anarchism is that the means that we use, so how we go about things, need to be congruous or aligned with the ends that we're trying to achieve. And this is critical, and I won't go into the historical conflict between Mikhail Bakunin and Karl Marx, which is where this came from, in the idea that a dictatorship of a proletariat didn't make sense as a way to get freedom to have dictatorship. So anyway, that's where that comes from. But in our world, which is more important in the moment, it means that if we want the guest to give great service, if we want the guest to get great service, then we need to give great service to the staff. And going back to the overall model of servant leadership, that, if the business is there for my benefit, but I want you to act like the customer's there for us to serve them, they're actually in conflict. Like, I'm taking out for myself. So if I'm taking out for myself, then the manager is taking out for themselves. Why would the hourly staff not take out for themselves? The customer's just a pain in the behind, right? This is the other way. If we're all serving, it's going to be more congruous, more in alignment, and the service energy is flowing out. And then it doesn't need to stop at the customer. Of course, it goes into the community too.
Mm. Yeah, and actually, and it costs nothing, which is quite interesting. Of course, it costs effort, but it costs nothing.
But it actually costs the other way. Like, if you don't do it well, then employees are working at less than high levels of effectiveness. We're losing customers. We're wasting energy. So people say it's expensive, but I would actually posit that it's more expensive by far the other ways.
Yeah. And that fits very well with the fourth step. And the fifth step, that I thought was really interesting about, like, there's a definition on, how much you need to go and learn, but also how you as a leader need to go and train.
Yep. So this is, for us, servant leadership means, in part, the fourth element is that we're actively learning and actively teaching. Why? Because if we're not, we're falling behind, and we're not bringing positive energy and new insights into the organization all the time. So, again, in the spirit of clarity and definition, we, I don't know if this is the right amount, but we agreed that 2 hours per week on average of active learning. So learning doesn't mean like I'm hanging out, walking down the street thinking about things, although that is learning too. I'm not trying to be dismissive of it, but this is not in lieu of that. That's also great, but this is formal learning. So listening to this podcast, going to a class, reading a book, and you and I both have a lot of those. So, going to seminars, coming to a Zing Train seminar, ordering the Dignity pamphlet and actually reading it, not just saying, dignity's a good idea, but to actually do that learning. And we say on average, because there's, like, this week is Thanksgiving in the US. So people might have a lot of family activity. They might not have time, but they could do 4 hours next week to make up for it. And then we also say 1 hour a month of teaching, because we know, I learned from Maggie at Zing Train many years ago, the highest level of learning is teaching. And that in order to teach, like, for me to be able to talk to you about what servant leadership is, I need to be at a much higher level than it doesn't make me a better person, but I need to be a higher level of understanding than just, I read it and it made sense. I need to be able to elaborate on, enumerate, and explain all of these 6 elements. And it makes it so that I can internalize it and really do it in practice, do it much better every day. So that's the fourth one, active learning and active teaching.
And then there's the last one. There's just called say thanks.
Well, I think we missed the fifth one,
the fifth one,
which is to help. I did internalize it. That help the staff to succeed. So the typical business model, which I sort of referenced before, is that the business hire. Like, we're busy, so we hire more people to help the bosses do better.
Yeah.
But this is the other way, which is where we take the mindset, the belief that we hire people in order to help them succeed. Yeah. So the busier we get, the more people we get to help succeed, and the better it goes. And that's really the point, is when you come in to work in our organization, if we're doing our job well, our work is to help you get to greatness. Because if everybody here is getting to greatness, the organization is killing it.
Yeah, and I think that's really also, like, so counterintuitive from the more, wouldn't call it classic, but the old paradigm of organization, where you actually talk about using the potential. Here it's actually to build more potential in what people already have, or unlock all that potential that's never been unlocked.
I mean, it's really a belief, right? So it's the belief that everybody is capable of getting to greatness and that they have greatness in them. But, like, what our greatness is, I don't know for everybody until we get to know them, which is the first step of great service. So finding out what they aspire to. And then, also paradoxically, like sometimes great service, backing up to the second one, is that we push them. Push them past where they're easily comfortable, because if you don't get, if we don't push each other, if we don't push ourselves, we're not really going to get to greatness.
Yeah, and I guess we have to live on that. We talk about the flow model, but I think we talked about that before, but actually where you are feeling a bit on deep water, but you still feel safe.
Yeah, well, it's the challenge. I mean, we all have that. We're working around the edge, and if we never push ourselves, in whatever it's working out or learning new subjects or traveling to places we've never been or whatever, then it's in a sense more comfortable, but we're not in the learning zone where we're actually challenged in healthy ways.
And then there was the last one. I jumped the gun before.
It's okay. Happens, man. There's no real value to the order. Those are just the order that I wrote them in. But yes, the last one is about being appreciative and saying thanks. Yeah. Thank you for bringing it up.
And how did that comes to life? Is that, just for the small things when...
Well, it is in the moment for the small things. It's not the only thing, but that's certainly one of them. So I'm not saying I get it right all the time. I mean, I come from a family that showed love by telling us what we should have done better. So this is really me in recovery from that well-intended but not very effective, I don't think, approach. And so, it could be as simple as in our world, like just thanking the busser for clearing a table. Like it's like, why not? And people sometimes will go, well, it's my job. I'm like, doesn't mean I can't appreciate it. And, the world is, the organization, the world, the community, it's all little things. I mean, like success, whatever it means, in quotes, doesn't come in the mail. Like it's made up of tiny interactions. So salting the soup right, clearing the table right, greeting the guest right, making eye contact effectively, handling a complaint well, sourcing a new product that raises the quality of our end product. Like, those are all things that are, and a million more that are contributing. So just being appreciative of the tiny things, and that's huge. It can also be taking a minute to be appreciative of somebody's growth, just sometimes, and I can think of many people here, who they've just grown so much as leaders over the years. And so just taking a minute and saying, I just really appreciate that is huge. Because they're not growing overnight, it's easy to take it for granted. Like, it's a gradual climbing of a mountain or whatever. Yeah. And now they're much higher up the mountain. It's easy to forget where they were 4 or 5 years ago. But, it wasn't easy for them to get there. They put a lot of work into it. So that's also helpful. And then we do have systemic stuff. So I don't know, 30 years ago, I learned this thing called appreciations from my friend Lex Alexander in North Carolina. And we still, to this day, end every single meeting with appreciations. It's one of the easiest things you can do. Like you said, it's free. Yeah. If it's a meeting of 5 or 6 people, it might take 5 minutes. If it's our Zingerman's wide huddle that we do every month, where it might be, 50, 40, 50, 60 people in the room, it might take 15 minutes, so, but it's optional. Nobody has to say anything, but it's just a moment or 2 or 5 or 10 where you pause the daily hustle and bustle to just reflect and be appreciative, because there's always things wrong, and it's easy for me or anybody to focus on what's wrong, or, well, we shouldn't have done this, or we should have done that better. And those are all true, but it's also true that we're very fortunate, and just to appreciate the people that we're around, to appreciate our customers, whoever, whatever it might be. I mean, everybody gets to make up their own thing. So you can appreciate your significant other, you can appreciate a new employee, you can appreciate anything, a supplier, but it just really always brings us back to that positive focus. And in the end of the meeting, no matter how tense the meeting conversation might have been, it helps us to reground into the positivity. And I wrote a piece on it, I think last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago. I've lost track, right around this time of year. But, it's not just that, but it actually improves our own energy by being appreciative. Yeah. And then the energy is impacting the entire business. So when everybody's scowling and angry at each other, it doesn't go well. And people get this is unfortunately happening in some parts of American politics right now without getting political, but it's like people get the whatever adrenaline rush, the endorphin rush of yelling at somebody. When while they're yelling, maybe it feels better, but it doesn't really help. And it doesn't create positive outcomes. It just creates negative energy that, and it's there's a certain head rush that goes with that, but in the long run, it's unhelpful. And so coming back to the appreciative is always hugely important here. And then we also we document customer comments. The critical ones are the suggestions we call code reds. It's super simple. And then the compliments are code greens. Many people document complaints, but they don't document compliments. We started with the complaints, but then it was like, well, we need to balance this. And so that's where that came from. So there's any number of ways to do it here. And then once again, we came up with a recommended ratio of 4 parts praise to 1 part constructive criticism. 5-6 to 1 is great too. But like I grew up in a family where, at least in my emotional memory, it feels like it was 1 to 4, so, and it wasn't coming out of ill intent. It was just like, you really should study more. You really should do this more. Why didn't you do, and it wasn't like they were trying to mess me up. It's just cultural beliefs, behaviors, habits. And this is trying to switch them so that you really make it the other way.
Yeah, and I actually, in my view on, been studying servant leadership for years, but also reading your approach to this, it's like really one of them you can go out and do straight away. You don't need to do any reading, anything. You can actually start to say thanks for small things. Yeah. And the energy you get from that and the people around, especially at this time of year in the food and hospitality industry where there's so much pressure, Christmas is coming up. There's lots of pressure on the staff. Those small things as a leader, they'll just mean a lot in the everyday play.
Absolutely. And it's just like the dignity in that sense. There's no cost. There's actually cost to not doing it, but the cost doesn't show up on the P&L directly. There's no line item for it, so people can be in denial. But the reality is, if we treat people badly, they're not giving great service. That means we're spending more time handling customer complaints. We're refunding more. We're having higher turnover. We're fixing issues that we, didn't need to happen, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really, I think, getting out front of it. The woman that I wrote about in this week's e-news, Carol Sanford, has a whole little book on it that's very good. She calls it indirect work. And I'd never used that term until I saw it from her. I'm sure she didn't make it up either, but she said most people, they're all looking for they try to do direct work, which is like, oh, just do this and then this will happen. Yeah. And so, she compares it, and I referenced it in the e-news to like playing pool or billiards. Like you line up the balls, you hit the ball. If you do it well, it goes in the pocket and it's all good. This is different because it's taking time to teach people in like the third element about ethical decision making. There's no immediate outcomes. Yeah. You're taking time to be appreciative. It's not like you got a $600 sale because of the next 5 minutes because you were appreciative. But it's doing all this work essentially to make the cultural soil of the organization healthier, so the plants that you put in the soil do better. And so that people make better decisions down the road. So it's an investment. If you want to look at it that way, but there's no guarantee that, if I spend 10 minutes with you on ethical decision making, the reality is you could still quit the next day. Yeah. And we can say, well, that was a waste of time. I'm never doing it again. But it's just really our beliefs around it. And our belief here is that it's an awesome investment in the health of the organization, the people, and the community.
And then one of the learnings I had over the years, and I can't remember exactly where I got it from. I had a reflection I do every day, which is first, what have I learned today?
Yep.
And then the second question is that have I actually what I'm grateful for, and who have I actually thanked? That's the third question. And actually, that makes you keep your bit in check, because there will be days where you don't say thank you. Either you were not surrounded with a lot of people, or you just forgot because you were in your own little world.
Yeah, and it's not. It doesn't make you a bad person if you don't. It's just rigor, So I think like now, all these years later, I'm used to it. I love the appreciations in the meetings because it goes on the agenda, so you can't miss. And so it really, those are systemic ways to help ourselves to do that. And then over time, it becomes a routine and a habit. But I always recommend to people, if they're really trying to do this, like just track yourself. It's not rocket science. You could do it on a piece of paper, old school. I mean, it doesn't have to be very fancy. You can count for the day how many times you appreciated and said thank you. And then if you never give constructive criticism, that it's not helpful either, because our job as leaders is to help people grow. So if all you do is walk around and go, great job, great job, great job, like after a while, nobody believes you, because it's obvious that you're just saying it to say it. So at some point, it's also got to be, Michael, I had some thoughts about last Thursday's shift. Do you have a minute to talk about it? Something like that. And then just, here's what I observed, so it's not dumping it on you. It's not blaming. It's not yelling at you. But at the same time, it's offering you opportunity to learn a new thing, or to take in a new perspective that can help you grow and help the organization in the long run.
In the book, if we turn the corner, because servant leadership, we can talk about it. But I think there's two elements more that really for me stood out in the book is the energy about what's about energy, and actually it goes really well from saying thank you, because that gives energy in a way. And you talk a lot about in the beginning of the book, I don't know about an accident that came early in the book, you talk about why energy is so vital in an organization. You're really inspired by the work of Anise.
Who's a good friend of mine, and she called me yesterday and I couldn't pick up at the time, so I need to call her back today and I'll tell her you said hello. But so I mean, energy, this is something that it's probably 15 years almost that we formally adopted positive energy as our definition of fun on a professional level in the organization. So I think it's one of the best things we ever did. It became a job expectation. So it's not just something that we desire. It's just part of the work. So just like coming on time, just like this is how whatever we make a cappuccino, it's a part of your job. So it's not like I'm not feeling it today. It's not a good legitimate excuse, in the same way that, I didn't really feel like it. I wasn't feeling it today, so I made a bad cocktail. Like, you can't say, no, that doesn't wash. So we learned it from Anise. I learned it from Anise. Our, again, adaptation of her works. There's much more to her work than what I wrote in that book. But that's sort of our adaptation of how to put it to work. And I think it's been huge in the organization. There's energy. I'm a history major, not a physics major, but even I know there's energy everywhere, and that energy doesn't go away. So if I walk into a room or a dining room or a kitchen or any room in the world, and my energy is, angry and I'm bitter, even if I'm not feeling that inside, but my body language is conveying it out of habit or whatever, that negative energy is going to pass through the room. And whether people are cognizant of it or not, they're going to pick it up. So the guest is picking it up, the staff member's picking it up. And then there's just no question, when there's negative energy in the room, more bad things are going to happen. So again, a politician or a boss or whatever can get up and bluster and blame and be angry, and it's but in the end, it's just putting more negative energy out in the room. And if I do it, the staff person picks it up, and then the customer complains, and the staff member gets mad at the customer because I was mad at them. Conversely, it ought to be the other way, which is, again, servant leadership. I'm bringing good energy. I'm giving service to the staff. the staff is then better supported and enabled and encouraged to give great service to you. And it's all about energy flowing out to the guest, which goes back to your first question about the state of hospitality. And then instead of the other way, which is the typical organizational model, whereas the energy is going to please the boss.
Yeah. And how do you then, because you have you have adapted some of Ani's works. She's written a number of books on this, but like you created again a recipe for how you implement it.
Again, it needs to be teachable. Like if you say dignity or servant leadership or service, or in this case, energy, like nobody argues with you, but they don't know what to do, so it's sort of like hiring a cook and going, make a good sandwich. But like, well, what is a good sandwich? I grew up on grilled cheese with American cheese and white bread. Like it's not what we serve here. So it's getting clarity on what it is. So we have 3 elements of energy that we adapted from Anis. The first 2 are not shocking, but we remind everybody of them because it's easy to forget. The first is your physical energy, which, when I teach it, I'll ask, like, what can you do to manage that? And people, of course, will respond with the appropriate things: healthy eating, hydration, exercise, getting enough sleep, etc. The second one is emotional or intellectual or spiritual energy. And, I'll ask them about that, and they'll stumble a little more on that one sometimes, but, it can be everything from meditation, yoga, therapy, any kind of spiritual activity, large and organized, or just personal reflection. I journal every morning. That's in the Managing Ourselves book. It can be walking in nature, music, and then also what I always suggest, back to the servant leadership fourth point about learning, is that active learning is like working out for your brain. And so part of what keeps your intellectual, emotional, spiritual energy high is active learning. Paradoxically, people will say, I don't have the energy to read a book, but it's actually the other way. Just like you're like, I don't have the energy to work out, but everybody who works out regularly knows that you don't have to feel like it. You just do it, and later your energy is increased from the workout. The same is true for active learning. And I say reading because that's what I like to do and you like to do, but it could be books on tape or listening to podcasts or, whatever. But if people aren't actively learning, I just suggest, my belief is their brain gets out of shape, and it doesn't make you dumb. It's just your brain's not used to learning, so for somebody who's doing a lot of learning, it's much easier to assimilate. Just like if you work out all the time, you still have issues. It's just much easier to work out. Like there's just no way around it, So that's the second one. And then the third one is what I learned from Anis to call vibrational energy. It's the vibe. It's not what you and I think that we're doing. It's what other people pick up from us. So, I could say, well, if I come in the room and I'm looking like that and I go, I'm perfectly happy. I might be happy on the inside, but the energetic presence that I'm bringing into the room is the opposite. It's very negative and critical. And so it's not about my intention, and it's not about my inner reality. It's about what you perceive my inner reality to be. So it can really never be judged fully by the person providing it. It needs, by definition, to be assessed by the audience. And vibrational energy can be impacted by any number of things. So it's implicit in a lot of what I said: body language, smiling, meaningful eye contact, tone of voice. All of those are critical. And then it's also impacted back to many of the other things we've sort of alluded to: humility, dignity, generosity, compassion, empathy, joy. And these are all, other podcasts in and of themselves. But the more we're engaging in all of those, the better our vibrational energy is going to be.
Yeah, and I think really when I was reading that through, and also going back and just touching on some of, because you actually introduced me to Anis' work, is like that intention you have to step into the room and always think about it. Just stop yourself instead of just walking into the room from one thing to the other. Just reset yourself and think, my intent when I go into this room is this. I want to have a positive impact. I want to be perceived tomorrow like there's nothing to worry about. We're going to be okay today.
Yep. Absolutely. And again, if you do this regularly, it becomes what Maggie at Zing Train would call unconsciously competent. You just do it. But in the beginning, most people aren't used to doing it. And this is true, equally true at home, by the way, of course.
Yeah.
If your energy's off with your kid, it's not going to go well. If your energy is off when you go to the store and the person providing you a service isn't grounded in this kind of work, they're going to react in kind to what you're doing. So it's really basically walking all around you. I can't remember that Peanuts character, but like, walking around. What was his name? I forget. But anyway, you have the Linus, like you have the dust cloud is all around you. So if your energy's bad, you're basically bringing bad energy, and then it's all downhill from there.
And the energy thing actually leads very much into, you touched on before, which I think is a really interesting concept around your ownership culture at Zingerman's. We all leaders. And they also come back to, what you learn from the great game of business, of open book management. But actually, it's all that we all have a responsibility to show up in principle in the right state.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I think this is in my conversation, it's obvious and implicit, but in the world at large, it's not. And so there's a lot of, I've seen it 1,000 times. Like people are blaming the server, blaming the bartender, blaming the line cook, but they're doing it because they show up, with very negative energy. And instead of treating the staff with dignity, they treat them with indignity, but then they're mad that the staff didn't treat the customer with dignity. Well, it started with you and me, so this is really what it's about. And in the book, there's the little 4-step recipe for energy management that we made up. The first is back to this first element of servant leadership. You can see how a lot of these are fitting together. So it's vision. So where do you want to be? It's, you mentioned Anissa's focus on intent or intention. Where do you want to be? I'm sorry. The first step is to read it. So 0 to 10 scale is what we use. The second step is to vision it. Where do you want to be at the end of a conversation? So again, this is setting your intention. So if I know I'm going into a difficult, a customer is really upset, or it's a performance review that's going to be uncomfortable, or a meeting where we're not in agreement and it's going to be difficult. This is really like knowing that I can get out the other side with good energy, but I need to be clear on where I'm trying to go. The third step is to manage it. So everybody's different. We all need different things. So as I say when I teach it, like I'm an introvert, so I like time alone. Paul, my longtime business partner, is an extrovert. He wants to hang out together. That's the last thing I want to do. I can go all day and barely eat. Other people got to eat a meal every 4 or 5 hours, or else they get very cranky. I don't, I can take a bite of a cracker here and there and, taste some, quality check some items, and I'm fine till dinner. Even then I'm fine too. I can drink coffee at midnight and go straight to sleep. Other people can't drink at afternoon. So it's just awareness of what works for you, and then being able to manage it. And the fourth step we say is to repeat it, because as soon as we get ourselves centered and grounded, especially in the hospitality, like whatever, plates are going to drop, an order's not going to show up, the cooler's going to break, the customer's going to act really weird, we can't find an order. 1,000 things that we all are all too familiar with can throw us off. So those 4 steps are what we try to practice every day.
And as you give people this ownership, Ari, this one of the question actually comes combined from one of the listeners, is that, is there any, like, on this journey of giving more ownership to people, from, you didn't start out with thinking we an ownership culture, it evolved over years, but what is the biggest challenge in that, as you as the founder? Because it's your baby in the end of the day, isn't it?
I don't know that there's any particular challenge. It's just beliefs. If you believe that it makes sense to share ownership, then, there's some technical difficulties to figuring it out, but it's not really any harder than working a Saturday dinner rush. It's no harder than cleaning the grill. It's all hard. It's just when you choose to do something that you want to do because it's what you believe in, it fits your long-term vision, et cetera, then it's just work, and it's part of the challenge, though, is that it's not a commonly held belief. the commonly held belief is you consolidate ownership. So if you look at the people who are, in quotes, famous and in the news, most of them consolidate ownership, and then people misconstrue that gives them this inspiring power. But I actually think it would suggest it's unhealthy for them. It's not fun. Like, they think it's fun because they have a lot of money, but in the long run, I don't know that they really create a life that is meaningful and that matters. But, that's up to them. So in our world, this is just the belief that spreading ownership more widely is better for everybody. It's better for us because we create a healthier organization, which makes my work more rewarding. So it's not like it's completely selfless, but it's also creating a healthier community and a healthier country because people learn to think like leaders. They learn to take ownership. And in the challenged state of our country, I wrote a piece, which you probably saw in the summer, about why democracy matters and taking the stance that democracy is not a political issue, it's an ethical issue. So going back to servant leadership, it's not a question of who you vote for, although that may have implications. It's really a question of values, just like we say diversity is a values issue. So yes, there's candidates that somebody votes for that might be more inclined towards it. But if we take the belief we have, which is the healthiest ecosystems in nature are the most diverse, why would you not want to be diverse? It doesn't make sense. Similarly, climate, it's not a political issue. That's crazy. It's an ethical issue.
Yeah.
So for us, this was just me evolving my beliefs to realize that, what I had long dismissed as sort of a spectator sport that I might have been happy with who won or didn't win. It's really more taking 100% responsibility for our communities, for our country. And that changing the boss matters, of course, but it's not going to fix the problems. Those changes come from us in the context of all the stuff we're talking about: dignity, servant leadership, energy management, compassion, care, and ownership. Spreading more widely is one way to support democracy, because when people feel ownership, they are much more likely to take responsibility for the Zingerman's community of businesses. And there's actually a British guy, maybe you want to get him on. I don't know him personally, although I've emailed him, but not heard back. But his name is John Alexander, John with an O, N, not with an H. And he wrote a book called Citizen. And I have referenced his framing quite a bit because it helped me. And he says that you can look at the world through the history of three stories. The first story is the subject story, which people in the UK are quite familiar with. It goes back to before the revolutions, and the king or queen tells you what to do. You may like it or be angry about it, but it's still their decision. The second story starts with the Industrial Revolution, which also begins in England. So going back to the 19th century, and it basically creates a consumer model where you and I, if people don't like this podcast, they go to another podcast. Yeah. If they don't like the food we served them, they go to another restaurant. And the fault is ours for not serving the right thing or not giving good enough hospitality, et cetera. And then the third story is the citizen story, which is where people take responsibility for where they're a part. And when I think the citizen story, and this is citizen in quotes, so it doesn't mean you could be an immigrant and not a citizen and still be a citizen of the Zingerman's community of businesses. It's not getting into that issue. But it's really taking responsibility for the whole of which you're a part, right? And ownership is one piece of that. And when I read his stuff, I realized, we're still even here stuck a little in that consumer story. Like, our job as leaders is to make this really appealing job. And if you don't like the job we served you, you quit and you go to another job. And then we go, man, we really screwed up. But this is trying to shift that into no, I don't know what I'm doing. We only can figure it out together. And we're all trying to work together to collaboratively come up with this community of businesses where everybody benefits. And so blaming and changing jobs here, I don't blame them if they choose to leave, but I hope that they choose to look at they're a participant, not a recipient. And that ownership helps, I think, to support that mindset.
Yeah, and I love
it's not a trick. It's not a trick. No. And just giving ownership doesn't make that happen, because people are citizens of the United States, but they act like they're passive victims. instead of acting like they're responsible for the whole country, whether they like everything or not. We're still responsible. And it's not about changing products. It's about changing our own behavior.
Yeah, and that starts with the belief, as we talked about last time, because if you believe is that, people can be owners and it's hard to do, it's gonna be hard. And as you said, it's a lot more difficult than to clean the grill. I love that. There's two more questions and then we'll be tidying up. And this question actually comes from one of the super fans as well. Somebody that's really bought into your journey as well, but says as well, on your journey, what has been the most humbling lesson that have helped you become more human and compassionate in your leadership style?
I don't know what the most humbling is, but it's humbling every day. I mean, it's just, things are going wrong every 5 minutes, and I'm a part of what went wrong. So again, it's easy emotionally to get, in a place of blame and bluster and complain. Which again, unfortunately is all over the news right now in the US, but it's not helpful. Like we're all in it together, and there's nothing that happens in the organization that I didn't contribute to in some way, better for both the good and the not good. So, if you got poor service at the bakehouse, I'm responsible. There's something I did that contributed to that. So, and then I think just it's a belief too, right? And that, as you know, I wrote a whole pamphlet on humility. And I think it fits with what we already were trying to do. But just like all the writing, as you alluded to earlier, it brings clarity and understanding what I already knew and have always known, which is we're not the most important thing in the world. No one is. And that the world is not meant to revolve around us. We're here for the world. So that goes back to servant leadership. The thing I didn't know until I did that work was to understand that having low self-esteem, low self-image, negative self-beliefs is also not humility. It's unhealthy in the opposite direction. And so humility, or what I've come to think of as humbleness, is really more trying to be centered, trying to be grounded, trying to be in the middle. Like we have flaws and we have positive things, and we're all failing and succeeding all day long. It's never done, and we never get it all right, and we never get it all wrong.
I love that. Yeah, and it's a great pamphlet. We might need to visit at some point because we
like you said, we got 100 conversations to have.
Because humility is probably one of the answers to many of the challenges we have in the world.
Yeah.
My last question, Ari, is what is the one question you wished I've asked you on becoming a better leader, which I didn't today?
I don't know. You could ask me what my most recent publication is, and then I could tell you that I have a new chapbook just came out last week that's well suited for anybody, but particularly for this audience, which is it's called Life Lessons I Learned from Being a Line Cook. And it's just, I guess it's in the spirit of humility, but it kind of starts with the true story, which is every now and again people trying to be nice in conversation. And they're like, well, how does it feel to be such a big success? And I'm like, I don't really feel like a success. And they're like, how can you not feel like a success? I'm like, I don't know. I don't. Like, I don't feel like I'm a failure either. I just feel, and they're like, well, how do you feel? And I'm like, I don't know. I just feel like a line cook that's doing pretty well. Which is true. Like, I never went into business to try to make a lot of money. I'm not averse to money, but it was never my driver. And it's not my driver now. And I don't mean it's irrelevant. And I'm not saying people shouldn't try to make money, but really for me, it was about the work, not the money. The money was a byproduct, not the product. And so, I just still feel like a cook who's trying to figure stuff out.
That was a very, very, very good question, because I think we will definitely come back to that piece of work you've done on that, because I think lots of leaders in this industry actually comes from as a front of house or a line cook.
Yep.
And that's where it all started. And we have to remember that. And the craft of that can set you off to many parts of life, even if you're not in hospitality anymore. There's some universal life skills in that.
Yes. And this is part of my work around the deep understanding stuff, which is, you've seen I've been writing quite a bit about, and I'm going to present on it actually next month at Zinger. Zing Train has their intentional leadership session. It's online, so people can access it through the Zing Train website and sign up. But I'm going to do a little session on this new chapbook, Life Lessons I Learned from Being a Line Cook. But it's basically framed around realizing that line cooking, I gained deep understanding about line cooking. Like, most people get a job as a line cook and they're like, it's just the drudgery of being a line cook. And I'm not saying I was so brilliant, but over the years, it just sort of formed into a life philosophy that really all had its roots in that. And my suggestion to people is, honestly, anything you do has all those lessons in it. Like, I happen to get them out of that, but you could get it out of being a poet or a parent, playing basketball, playing cornet. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, everything has life lessons if we choose to dive into it. And I'm going to share on there sort of what I'm learning still to right now, but what are the things I believe contribute to making that kind of deep understanding possible.
Awesome. Ari, as always, it's been a great pleasure to have you on. If people want to know more about you, we'll put the links for Zingerman's Community of Business, Zing Train into the show notes. But if they want,
you can give them my email too. It's just Ari. You have it, but it's Ari@Zingermans.com, and then also the link to the e-news so they can sign up.
Yeah, that's a huge value in the e-news. I can definitely sign up on that, and lots of reflecting to be done as you read through that every week.
Well, thank you.
Thank you again, Ari.
I learned a lot too, so it's good.
Thank you again, Ari. Sending you and the team at Zingerman's Power and Energy and Love to go through the next couple of weeks. I guess it's a busy period ahead for you guys as well, especially in the food and hospitality part of the business.
Yep. It's all good. We'll get through. It's our 43rd one.
Experience never, it's never, you can never underestimate the experience of having that kind of, record behind you. That really, and then a good level of servant leadership, I can imagine it becomes a smooth journey into Christmas.
All the more important. So, okay, well, take good care, Michael, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.